come into our midst and to calm us and give us the grace of a listening ear to minister to our soul. This evening I picked up two verses which indicate in some way the two ways of a soul in its journey through life and therefore through eternity. The Lord's attitude is constant, but the soul is its own worst enemy. We have, first of all, in the 8th chapter of St. John, the conclusion to this little episode, which is only to be found in this Gospel. The woman caught in adultery. Jesus again straightened up and said, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir." "Neither do I condemn you. Go away, and from this moment sin no more." So there is a receiving of the person where the person is, but not a leaving of the person where she was. This, of course, is a key in handling all souls. We receive them as they are. We avoid putting them in a bottle, a category, under a label, and in any way doing God's work of judging them, but we do our level best to make sure that they don't go back to where they've come from. That is the issue. And if our preaching, our ministry, our confession, whatever it may be, does that, then we're on automatic pilot and a thorough nuisance for the kingdom of heaven. So there is this warm reception, but an invitation to go up higher. And it's a false mercy not to give people the clarity that secretly they actually want to hear. It's painful, but they know deep down when they're hearing the truth. Now, this person was abused by a man, and in society that she was in, she was getting the blame. We have a little later on in this same chapter, men. And here we have men who are actually professionals at their business, which is a holy business. And we have this other reaction here. They asked him, "Where is your father, then? You do not know me, nor do you know my Father. If you did know me, you would know my Father as well." So here we have what, as professionals, we are asked to have. Knowledge in the Hebrew sense of intimacy and relationship. We can't be functionaries. There is a little book in England which is a collection of children's prayers. And they're caught just like that on bits of paper by a teacher. And there are some interesting spontaneous prayers from children there. One is, "Dear God, is Father Coe really a friend of yours? Or is it a working relationship?" And that, by the way, is picked up very quickly by people in church. They can see a person at the altar in relationship. And I read this recently somewhere, or heard it actually from a retired bishop. He was giving us a holy hour before the Blessed Sacrament in the cathedral, and he gave this just remark in parenthesis with regard to what a priest needs to convey and what the people secretly want. He just repeated what he'd heard from some parishioner. He, after his retirement, had been more free to go around helping locally in parishes that needed a priest. And he bumped into this person that he knew was not from that parish, but in this parish that Sunday. "Oh, greetings, what are you doing in this parish?" And the person was very honest. "Well, my Lord, it's like this. The truth is that here I find a priest who really prays the Mass." And she went all that way just to get an uplifting celebration where she was meeting God and not man. He spoke these words in the treasury while teaching in the temple. Now, the Lord is teaching in a structure, and that is actually what we do. Quite often, we don't have to fabricate a whole lot of spectacular things to go happening here and there, which take our energy, but to use well the structure, because providence, out of the blue, calls us into a pulpit. It's all prepared, people are there, you've done nothing. Use that slot. That's what the Lord did, and the apostles too. No one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. Again he said to them, "I am going away. You will look for me," and here is where I wanted to land, "and you will die in your sin." Frightening words. So the fullness of the gospel is not just to give the nice bits. The gospel is a complete message, and the good news has little sense if there's no bad news. And so we have to give people the full message for them to realize what a Saviour they have. It was not nice on the cross, and if the Lord underwent that, there's a reason for it. It's our place. Therefore, punishment, or whatever you want to call it, the getting back of the balance is in the cosmos. And a child will tell you that. It makes no logical sense, really, to indicate that somebody of the caliber of, shall we say, Mother Teresa is going to get the same end product after death as somebody as the caliber of, well, we just talked about Hitler this afternoon. And by the way, unfortunately, we know from exorcism certain souls who are down there. Because in some cases, the loss is so terrible that they get close to the top, underneath, if you see what I mean. And they come out in the form of human demons. Well, there are some big names which have come out, not that long ago actually. One was Cain, which is interesting. It indicates the historicity of Cain. Another is Nero. I'm trying to remember some. One is certainly Hitler. And there are others too, indicating that these people, unfortunately, were hugely successful in this world. Well, Cain, question mark. But at what price? And it's not always a good indication if people get everything in this world. There is going around the, by now, fairly well-known letter from hell, which actually is of German origin. It was something which happened in the experience of a young lady whose name was Claire, and she, perhaps as a result of this strange experience, became a nun, but died very early on in her religious life. And she had this friend in inverted commas called Annette, and she was killed suddenly in a road accident. And her friend, not yet a nun, was praying for her soul. And she had this strange communication. "Claire, stop praying for me. I'm lost. I'm damned." And she was also given to understand what actually happened. It's a strange communication, but it's gone out, and it seems to be authentic. The reason we know it's authentic is because there are details in there which they verified historically, and they knew you couldn't have known this. There were things in the life of the person that only the person knew. So it's interesting. And it's very recent in time, because motor cars are recent. It happened before the war, but not long before the war. And it's very modern too, in the way that she actually lost her soul. It was actually on a Sunday morning. And that very Sunday morning, she'd had an interior nudge. You could perhaps just go to Mass one last time. And she had this immediate reaction, no! Let's be finished with this once and for all. And very shortly after that strong no, this car appeared on the horizon at colossal speed. Her new husband lost control, and she said, some German, not prayer form, but kind of swear form of Jesus, and a few seconds later woke up on the other side. And it's extremely relevant insofar as we see exactly how she got there, because it indicates that what actually happened was that lastly, that last pull of grace, which is always given to a soul apparently, followed the proclivities already undertaken through long habit. And so the instinct was always to say no. There was one point before that happened in which, maybe a few years before then, she had been tending her sick and eventually dying father. And also somehow indicating at that point a minimum of human goodness which was there. And actually, I think maybe a bit dying of mother, because the father also had a sad death, and there's something happened there which is rather sad, because apparently the father could have made it too, because he also was given a final grace, and there was something to do with the daughter concerned. There was some kind of flicker there of hope, but it didn't work. In the same way, the daughter, she was good to helping somebody who was actually dying, and at one point, when she was doing that, she was feeling something inside her saying, this is the right way, and she was close to returning to some form of grace at that point. So we see there what's going on. The Lord is pulling all the time, but there's a tiny spark of goodness in the soul. And these inspirations are genuine from the Holy Spirit, and we have to go along with them, because we have to seek where they are in every soul. They're there, potentially, and we look for them. You never block out a person, because there's always some hope. But anyway, the long and the short of it is that she didn't make it, and she too has appeared in exorcism as a lost soul. Unfortunately, she's down there. Now, with regard to this dying in your sin, it's linking up with what I had this morning there were two cases there. Claude, and he by then, of course, was very much in a state of grace and wanting to go home. Of course, he would have gone the other way had he not had that experience. It was the miraculous medal it sparked all that off. But then the other one, that is actually a frightening true story, because the more one thinks about it, the more one sees, without that supernatural intervention, just a few seconds later, with the application of those volts which would have sent him off like that into the beyond, he would have woken up in a terrible, terrible state of loss. Remember spitting on the doctor and so on before. Now, this business here, it's not quite so dramatic, usually, but that spitting on grace is around. And people are going into the beyond, not really having thought about what it is to, for a long time, say no, 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 no to the pulls and nudges of the Holy Spirit, because in different forms it's happening to every soul. The Holy Spirit is around big time, trying all he can to get through to the minimum spark in a soul, which is always there. So, right now, the great means he has is distraction, blocking out solitude and intimacy with one's own heart, let alone God. Because normally, in our civilized Western society, the average person, if one looks carefully at his day, is hardly ever really alone. Because if he's alone, he's plugged in. He immediately gets out the mobile phone or something which plugs him into something outside his soul. And even in bed, a person is fiddling with his mobile phone. So that's what we're up against. So it's a huge victory for the enemy of the soul. Keep them moving, keep them moving, keep them moving. Don't let them have this thought of the beyond, which is the only one that matters. So in that context, we look here at the other side of what I started earlier on today, what has been referred to as the devil's catechism. We're here on what the devil dislikes. Now, from this collection of Padre Pellegrino, we have this little list, the other side. A. Confession. What a stupid invention. How much it pains me, he says. It makes me suffer. The blood of that false god of yours. Confession boxes are beautiful places. In Italy, they're still there. I used to hear confessions in old boxes, one of which had written on it the date when it was made. It was 1690 something, still functioning. And there were churches nicely renewed here and there, but they kept certain things. And I remember going to one church not far from the monastery one Sunday afternoon with a novitiate, and Don Celestino was the parish priest, happened to appear at that point, and he showed us the church, because he was very good at restoring churches. He did them very well, kept it as they should be, but just made necessary changes. And he showed us the confessional, and he said to us in quaint Italian, he kept it, perché ha sentito tutti I peccati. It has heard all the sins. You're still hearing to this day. And that was the experience that one had. It was there in this old drill, and just as it was before, the same style, human nature is just the same. And sins are fundamentally just the same. Only now we've got a few which weren't in the manual when we were doing theology. There are whole new sins coming on board with cybersphere and all this, so they're new ways of offending, but they're just forms of the old thing in a different way. But there are actually interesting new forms in the, see, if one looks, for instance, at what is happening in the privacy of a respectable person's room, quite often now, he's doing very respectably something which before was extremely serious, because it might be just by flicking the right button, going into gazing at the body of a woman to whom he's not married. So he's married, it's a sort of virtual adultery, sort of. So that's we have to be aware of that. It's not just small fish, these things. It has to be brought out because they become addictive. So you've got this bad habit going on for donkey's years. It's not good for the soul. Now, so confession, therefore, making sure that they're trying to get these sins out of their system. And of course, if we don't preach on these things, we're responsible. We're colluding with old Nick. That blood, how it crushes me, it destroys me. You know, in the damnation of Faust, there's this scene where he's dying and the demon is coming for his pound of flesh, and he's in desperation there. And he says at one point in the play, one small drop of this blood would be enough. It washes your souls, and it makes me run away. Here we have horrible crying screams on the tape. That blood is my most atrocious pain. And I have at home, because I have the normal chapel where I pray and have Mass, but I have a larger chapel which is also a sitting room. It is a chapel as well. If I have a group more than half a dozen, I use that one. And in that tabernacle, I have actually a fairly consistent relic of the Holy Cross because of my links with the Cistercians. It came from Rome, a splinter which was split in three. It's a long story, but anyway, it's there. And we know it's authentic from the demon itself because the monk who gave it to me, who had custody of the main relics there in Rome for a good while, he said that there was a bishop who was an exorcist. He's now not long dead, I forget his name, but he was having a job to cast out this demon one time in Rome, and he said to him, "Okay, I'll get the relic of the true cross." And immediately there was an outburst of screams and all kinds of blasphemous noises, and the demon himself said, "Not that, not that, it's got his blood on it." That's the power of the precious blood. But I have found those priests who no longer believe in confession. I was just talking actually to Don Mark, the one who's founding there just near where I live, who's responsible for being here today. And he had with him previously, some weeks previously, some priests from France, from la community de Saint-Martin. It's a very good community. They're around France now, but it's conservative, but they do, it's very orthodox, but they do the new rite, but they're kind of safe and sound. And the bishops use them because they do good work when they get to a parish. And they get to parishes which is completely dismantled, basically, and they take over and they build it up bit by bit. And they find this experience. They go to a parish, and confession has been going on for the last 30 years or something. And if people occasionally came to the parish priest before, and they know this from the people themselves, the parish priest would have said, "Oh, arrangez-vous avec le grand patron." Sort yourself out with the great boss. You know, it's confessional. In other words, they weren't even encouraged. So, and around you've got quite a lot of these penitential services which are actually inviting to sacrilege. Because it's good to have, for instance, at Advent and Lent, common celebration of the sacrament, but it has to be complete. In quite a few places now, they're having, as you probably are aware of, I don't know if it happens here, but it's happening a lot in Ireland. It's quite alarming. And the bishops don't seem to be stopping it. I don't know what's going on there, but they have these celebrations where you're invited to say one sin or something. It's ridiculous, because I mean, you have lots of things on your conscience after a few weeks got off, and I mean, you can't presume people aren't without mortal sin. So I mean, it's quite serious, because I mean, that's generalizing in a situation in a parish from year to year, incomplete confessions. So there we are. It's a great victory for somebody.
It was a Dutch invention.
Is it a Dutch invention? I didn't know that now. It came from your place.
In the year 65-66, the rate of confessions dropped from 95 to 5%.
Wow.
And they had so-called penance celebrations.
Yes.
Even by bus, they came from Germany to
Really?
India, because it was a lot easier. You don't have to confess your sins. You only have to listen to the word and to say one prayer, and that's it. And general absolution.
So it came, I didn't know that now.
Yeah.
So a lot of things came out of Holland.
Yeah. Not only cheese is coming from our country.
Unfortunately, you said it all. It's amazing actually, because people don't realize what they're missing. As I said, every Sunday I'm in the box for an hour or two there, because they come before and after, and it's young people coming, a lot of them, and they really want it. And some people might come just for the confession. I mean, they would have got to an earlier mass or whatever, or a Saturday evening one, but they'd come especially for the confession. And it's, you see, they really want to be followed through. When you're taking them seriously, they feel it. It's kind of spiritual accompaniment, they call it in France, l'accompagnement spirituel. And it's very precious for a soul to know that you count to them. Now, but I have found those priests who no longer believe in confession and send the Christians to receive that force God in sin. Good, good, very good. How many sacrileges I caused to be committed. And the more the person is in a mess, in a sense, the easier it is to get through to the person. The hard ones are those who are full of themselves. One day, Pope John Paul II, our Saint John Paul II, was in the Vatican somewhere, and he noticed this person in dire straits. He looked like nothing on earth. He was wearing essentially the clothes of a tramp, but he was hanging around close to where the Pope happened to be, and the Pope happened to be pretty alone at that point for some reason. And he started to talk. It turned out that he was actually a priest who'd abandoned the ministry years previously. And you know what John Paul II had the inspiration to do and say at that point? May I ask you a favour? Would you please hear my confession? And immediately got a special grace to return to full pistons functioning in the priesthood. So the right word at the right time, coming from the Holy Spirit, can change all eternity. B. The meal where you eat the flesh and the blood of that crucified one that I killed. It is here that I lose my battles. It is here I find myself disarmed. I no longer have strength to fight. I get quite a few requests to sort out houses where things are going bump in the night. But they're not demons, they're actually human spirits. But it's a bit strange, the business. Some are more severe than others, but it usually actually does have an effect. I was going to say that because the context was that the demons go to get to a priest. They now get to a priest. See, not demons, well, these souls, through mercy, divine mercy, see, they have to have the holy sacrifice. That's the only thing that can really help them. That's the point, you see. And then, especially if the house is haunted, it has to be a physical thing. And other things, they can have an effect, but it's not the same as the holy sacrifice. And that these souls know it full well. Those who nourish themselves with the flesh and drink this blood become very strong against me. They become invincible against my shrewd seductions and temptations. They seem different from the others. And by the way, we know from that manuscript which came through Claire, the young nun who died after that experience, that the devil hates to see young children receiving Holy Communion because he knows that they're pure and it does them a lot of, for him, harm. So it's good to give a very good experience of Holy Communion to little children. They're still innocent, but they will listen to what you say. For good or for bad, they'll take in what they're told. Tabula rasa. But they can be educated well, children, because they're still fairly okay, as long as they're not selfish. Unfortunately, small families produce these centres of their solar system. A one-child family is not a healthy way to have. See, now we have big families, and it's much healthier for the children. And but normally, any child is pretty close to the original experience of innocence still, and will sort of more or less take what is told with regard to the supernatural. The only thing is, it's confused with other things like Santa Claus, and it's very misty sometimes. Now, it seems that they have a special light and a very quick intelligence. They reject me immediately, and they distance themselves from me, and they crush me as if I were a dog. What sadness, what pain to deal with these, and he calls them cannibals. But I fiercely persecute them, and many go and eat that host in sin. What happiness, what contentment, what joy. They hate their God, and they eat him. My victory. Hurrah! How senseless are those who waste hours and hours during the day and night kneeling to adore a piece of bread. It's the very thing that we're doing here. And actually, because Mother Prior asked me to do it now last night in the middle of the night, it's actually very interesting doing those night moments when the whole world and even the monastery is asleep with the angels. It's actually of a mystical order, and it's very important for the church that can happen, because it's balancing what's going on in the darkness of night, because the demons are sort of more free when there aren't people praying around them, and things happen. We know, for instance, that satanic rites, rituals, happen at the hour of unmercy, as, for us the hour of mercy, 3 o'clock is important, we can plug into Calvary at that point. So too, for them, things happen at 3 in the night. And that's when these things are going on. And we notice also that people commit suicide at that kind of time. In other words, it's a messy time, those dark hours. And the more this adoration is going on at night, the better. To adore a piece of bread hidden in a box on the altar of that false god. How much these people anger me. They destroy all my works that I obtained through so many sacrilegious Christians, priests, sisters, and bishops. How many sacrileges I continually reap. It is my incessant victory. How much pain, how much rage these irrational adorations. And the tendency to remove the Lord from the centre of attention, even physically in church, by deplacing the sacrament there, to put it not at the natural centre of attention in the church, but somewhere more discreet, is questionable, because the Lord is Lord, and God of God and King of Kings, and that is his temple and palace. And if something else, like a chair, is where that should be, where a human being will sit, there's a question over that. I hate, this is number C now, the rosary. That broken and rotten tool of that woman is like a hammer for me, which splits my head. It is the invention of some false Christians who do not obey me. For this they follow that bad woman. So if it's such a powerful tool, it needs to be taken seriously and said well, indeed celebrated well, because the rosary can be a moment of intimacy amongst the people, well celebrated, not just got through, two different notions, and it can be both powerful in its impetration for intentions, which we can actually place in the decades, and binding among those who are praying and sharing the Lord's presence. It can be useful use of time in the car at the end of the day. There are ways and means, it's the simple prayer that everyone can use, from children to adults, ways and means of making that prayer not just a duty or getting through something, but actually genuinely a pulling on the power of heaven, because apparently this instrument, this devotion, is not just indifferent. We know that, as I say, from the insistence at Fatima and so many others too. Our Lady really wants this to be kept. Satan knows it, and we see what happened in many places after the council. It was old-fashioned. It's still there in Ireland, but it's not as it was, because the television has taken over what used to be in every household before. It used to be always the rosary in the evening, but it's been quite difficult to compete against the television. But still, you can always use the Decade of Rosary wherever you go. People still know it, from the greatest to the most humble. Now, they are false. Instead of listening to me, the one who reigns over the whole world, these false Christians go to pray to that wicked woman, my first enemy, with that instrument. How much pain it causes to me. If you can't stop it altogether, he'll make sure it's badly said. It's almost as good. We got to the end, and so on. In other words, duty, but no encounter. D. The greatest pain in this period of time for me. Now, yes, that's an interesting one. These continual presences, the apparitions of this wicked woman in the whole world. She appears in all the nations, and she persecutes me, snatching from my hands so many souls, thousands and thousands, to listen to her false messages. Fortunately, the bishops and priests who do not believe in that vile woman defend me. They do not believe, and so they cause confusion. Good, these my apostles of heresy. E. But what destroys me even more is the asinine, that's a good adjective, asinine obedience that man, to that man dressed in white, who commands in the name of the false Redeemer and of your false Saviour. And then there's an unpleasant word here which I won't use, sheep, or rabbits, to obey a man who loves that wicked woman there, who always persecutes me. What a shame. This destroys my kingdom. I think this is probably the period of John Paul II, isn't it? Totus Tuus. The link between him and Our Blessed Lady is there. But I have lifted up hundreds of priests, brothers, theologians and bishops who make war against him. Does that sound familiar? War without borders on that white cloud. I will win. I will win. I will kill him. I will murder him. He will end up very badly. He is odious to my followers. That Polish man that loves that wicked woman there, who propagates the rosary of that low-minded woman as his preferred prayer. What a coward. Another bad word here. He crushes me, screams of crime. In student days, one could always have access to the Pope. Was it the first Saturday of the month? I forget. No, it was every Saturday. But he would be in the Sala Neri. Without a ticket, one could go there and pray the rosary with him. We like to have young people. Lots of them would go, just time of prayer, the rosary with the Holy Father on Saturday evening. He loved the rosary. And in fact, in my hermitage, I have his voice, and I can play it still with him. The Pauline have put it on a little instrument there. It's about the size of one's hand. We can take it anyway. It's got all 20 mysteries, because he added 5. And he's got his Our Father, his voice there, playing it. And then you've got just Italian ladies playing the decades. But it's a great help. You can still, as it were, link up to John Paul II. And of course, this may have been written actually before the assassination attempt, because they did get him, didn't they? And miracle, it was genuinely, we know now from medical science, it was an absolute miracle. There was no way. I mean, Our Lady actually did perform a miracle at that point. And of course, the bullet is in the crown in Fatima. F. I am very vexed by those little servants with the head covered, who abandon all and everything in order to close themselves within 4 walls, in order to sacrifice all that is beautiful and good for that God that only I have succeeded in defeating. So it's interesting that should come out here in this very place where it's happening. Day and night they mortify themselves with night prayers and reckless and insubstantial fasting. They do not sleep sufficiently. They do not eat according to the needs of the appetite and of the body, which demand the necessary diet. They do not speak freely, anywhere and always. And by the way, that's also a ploy of the underworld, getting them to speak at times when they shouldn't be speaking, because we know in the monastic world that there's been a weakening there too. And if, for instance, the devil can persuade them with this argument, we're in fraternity, and therefore we share, that getting them therefore to encroach upon those sacred hours, 2 or 3 hours in the morning, 2 or 3 hours in the evening or the afternoon, when they're doing manual work, which according to the Desert Fathers would be a mode of allowing the mind to be free to pray. It's an extension of the life in liturgy and in formal prayer, that it's still one linear movement of prayer, but while doing something useful. In other words, it's manual work with a difference. You can work outside and talk, but manual work in the monastery is of a different order. It's allowing, the whole point is simple work, to free the mind, to be able to be in union with the Lord. With, in the East, the continual invocation of the Lord. If you look at a YouTube of Mount Athos, look carefully at their lips. If they're painting icons, if they're working at the olives, the lips are moving continuously. They're reciting without a stop the Jesus prayer, and often linked with the breath. In other words, that's correct understanding. Going back to the desert, more or less, the ethos of what manual work is about in the monastery. The devil knows it full well. A false philosophy of sharing, of fraternity, and then you've got them. It's wasted time for the church, because there's 5 hours just going into chit-chat, which usually becomes not without sin, gossip, criticising, whatever, that kind of thing, the in-house stuff that goes on in monasteries. I mean, what do you talk about? Well, you can't even invent stuff. I mean, humanity doesn't change, does it? So it's very interesting if you've got that going on for 5 hours. The devil is having a field day. So it's basically, there's no point in entering into a monastery where that's happening. You can do that outside. And we can see what happens. Certain monasteries, bit by bit, have to close down. And others, for some reason, are getting vocations, question mark. Well, the Lord is the author of vocations. Where will He send them? There where He'll get the most of glory. So if He's going to get glory there, He served, the time of the church being well used, that's where He'll send them. The same applies to seminaries. Actually, I was talking to a bishop the other day, and probably we've only got one seminary now, only one left, one big one, one proper one, and people who would be traditional find it sometimes a bit difficult. So what do? They go outside the country or to an order or whatever. So I'm sharing this with the bishop who's in vocations here. And he was aware of it, so that he actually tends to send them to Rome. It's a bit safer. But you see, again, the same pattern is emerging there, and it's going down. I mean, basically they're not getting the vocations there now. We only had 14 entries, 14 entries this year into a big Catholic country, from all dioceses into maybe both, certainly Maynooth, whereas there were, I think, 57 in Britain, where there are fewer Catholics. Interesting. So there, it's not just social, but you see that we're handling here, we can't program vocations. There's no way we can ask for them, but we're handling here the divine. We're not in control of the divine. We can, on our part, do our bit to make sure that if we are anyway responsible for a vocation, we will give the maximum. And the Lord then will do the rest. We have also responsibility for being the mouthpieces and the channels of orientation for these poor souls. It's important to be well informed where you can send or invite a person to go, and be very balanced. You have to inform yourself, because you see, that can be a disaster. If they're badly advised, well, we're responsible. It has to be 100% sure that it will be well handled, and if there's a vocation there, it will be respected and not in any way crushed or changed or altered to please man's fancy. It's not fair. Because often the best are lost. It's tragic. Now, so the devil hates these people altogether. Now, always taciturn, sulky looking, full of sadness, the most inhuman. They pray, they sing, and all this sacrifice they do for who? For what particular motive? For what ends? For what results? Fortunately, the vast majority are not very intelligent, dull-witted, lacking in willpower, who let themselves be dragged in by some dissatisfied priests, poor sissies, who do not know the true pleasure of sex with all its relative pleasures. Poor little servants who have never felt the sensations of the flesh by way, and so on, it goes on. Spare the detail. And then he goes on here. And yet, how many of them I caused to fall? I reduced them to a wretched life, sterile, deprived of all fervour, throwing them into the greatest lukewarmness. Yes, I butcher them, because above all I fear the cloistered ones. And of course, his great Trojan horse is the box. And before, it's still there in communities which don't have it. They have, if there's recreation at all, they have to do it themselves, and they get quite good at it. It's an ancient tradition, and it's quite impressive what they can actually do. But now it's so simple to have it done for one, bring in the box, and it's all done. And actually that, on a wider level, has harmed human talent in the world in general, because whereas before, in the society from which I've come, Wales, in the farming community, they would get together and they would do it themselves. A nos on Lawen, a happy evening, but you see it was local talent, and it was cultivated to the maximum, and getting people to laugh and so on with innocent means and recite and sing and all that. Now, if one looks around, proportionately, human talent is not cultivated in the same way. I'm not sure now if you'd find that same proportion of people able to entertain a whole assembly as they could before. It's all done for us from an early age. So impoverishment has happened even on the cultural level, on the human level. A little parenthesis, my brother, who's responsible for the Welsh television, before he was actually responsible for it, he was involved with doing certain things directly, and he reserved one area for himself, light entertainment. And he told me it's the hardest of all. That's why he wanted to keep it for himself. Because he would go around the whole of Wales looking for local talent and get them on the screen. So these are things which, unfortunately, we're losing even on the human level. The television is a huge enemy of genuine culture, genuine talent, and genuine human life. If one wants knowledge, one can use a calculated moment of television, aiming for a bit, a documentary. The same applies also to the internet. One can aim for a research of a specific issue and find information on YouTube. In a short time one gains the knowledge of a book condensed into half an hour. It's good use, responsible, mature use. As going into a library, one aims for one subject, one looks for the book, one sticks with it, one reads it, and then that's it. One can't read a whole library. But people are doing that equivalently. They're spending time in passive viewing, both of internet and of the television, and anything which comes up they'll absorb in that mode. It's a devastating use of an evening and therefore of life. So we must give the example, and often in this realm, to show that we can give a balanced view of things is better than giving an extreme one. If one has to preach or whatever, one teaches maturity and not absolutes. It goes down better. I fear greatly, so he hates these cloistered ones. They are my most terrible and well-trained enemies. They rip from my hands so many souls of every sex, of every class and condition, are terrible enemies. When they begin to pray for the conversion of the soul to snatch from me, they no longer stop, no longer, they are tenacious and obstinate. And then it is not enough. The long and exhausting prayers to their false and crucified God, who they shamelessly call their spouse. They then begin with the arduous penances of every type, what enemies and so on, because he can't bear this business of penance attached to prayer. What stormtroopers, he calls them. I have tried many times to diminish the vocations to this stupid life, but unfortunately I have not yet succeeded well. Not everywhere. There are still too many stupid, little and foolish women, even though many times they have college degrees. What enemies. I was one time helping in a new foundation in Italy, a French foundation. You may have heard of Les Sœurs de Bethlehem, the Sisters of Bethlehem. They're kind of Carthusian style. They also now have the Frères de Bethlehem. It was a providential starting point. It was way back in the holy year 1950. A great grace was given to a group of young women on the 1st of November in that holy year, and they knew they had to do something different. They had to found this. So it happened. And it happened through providence also that the main lady responsible for the money, it was the actual econome, was the sister of the prior general of the Carthusians, who was prior for years, Don André Poisson. And he was very great, a great help to them on every level. And then the brothers came along after. The brothers came also through providence. It's another story, I won't go into that's too long. Anyway, but all that to say that I was there with I was ministering to them one time in Italy, and I noticed there, from speaking to the Mother Superior, that these lovely women, of which there was a great number of young ones, they weren't just anything at all in terms of human value. They were of highest human caliber. And she was telling me just calmly like that, giving me some idea of how much in the way of degrees and formation they'd had before entering. The highest possible human caliber was in there. So that's interesting, that these were burning lights, sacrificing themselves in pure prayer. They've gone anyway in life. Now, G, this is the last one on this list. Then there are my real fierce and relentless persecutors. They are those who are called exorcists. What an ugly breed, what a disgrace in the world. Fortunately, there are still few, very few, because I dissuade the bishops from nominating them. And these believe me and obey me, even against the command of their crucified God, who commanded them, in my name cast out demons. What clowns! These bishops are afraid of me. Much, very much. I already possess them, and I cause them to do. I cause them not to allow exorcisms against me, and I do not even allow them to nominate exorcists. Yes, they could themselves do it, you see, but they don't. Without delegating, they themselves could do it. What ferocious enemies! Many times I have succeeded in vindicating myself, to punish them, to slap them, to beat them, to stop them with many different sicknesses. Yet that can happen too, sometimes even serious. Now this is something, because in our monastery in Italy, we were up against this. People would come to us and we would feel the need to be able to do exorcism. We approached the bishop, because the monastery does it all, and we approached the bishop about this, the Archbishop of Siena, and he was actually open to it, but he was insisting you'd have to do a course in Rome or somewhere, and you'd have to, it's not so simple. And he was warning us, well, if you start on this line, you won't get out of it, he was saying, because they'll all come to you, and it's extremely demanding, because they go on for hours and hours and hours and hours. And it's a messy business and a very rowdy business. But things happen there, which, you see, it's not safe. You've got to be so unafraid, for one thing. It's extremely violent. And things, most peculiar things happen. I was listening to lectures by exorcists on this kind of clergy retreat course, whatever you want to call it. And it was actually in Fatima. And there were experts there. And there was stuff on photo being shown on the screen and stuff. What has been coming out in exorcisms? And they had a series of exhibits, and it was, each one was just one person had vomited these objects, and there was lots of them, at least 10 of them, 10 or 20 of them, different cases, and there were all kinds of stuff coming out of the mouth of the possessed person, nails and all the rest of it, and big objects and satanic objects, and in other words, it's a real business, it's not child's play, and therefore that's why you have to be, of course there's a reason for being prudent, and you have to be a holy life, otherwise the demon will start telling you your own sins. And by the way, if one is involved in that, one has to go to confession before one starts, if not, the devil will come out with your own sins in public. And so, it's an extremely violent thing. Genuinely, the person is not that person, it's the demon himself, in that person, he's quite frightening. So all that is, of course, what we're up against, and the devil, of course, he likes to be in these people. It's more comfortable than being in hell. Although he's also in hell. But I mean, it seems to get some relief from being in these human beings. Now, these bishops are afraid of me and so on. And he makes them ill, or he makes these exorcists ill, because it all happens if one starts to have a hand-to-hand combat with the demon. But unfortunately, they do not give up. They do not give up. And when they approach my victim, I must run away. So the victim will be the possessed person, or sooner or later I must flee. There is one thing which is actually available on DVD and perhaps even on YouTube, I'm not sure. It's the case of Annalisa Miguel. It comes through in the media as the exorcism of Emily Rose. And it seems to be fairly accurate with regard to what happened there. It was a very strange case, and we know from the exorcist's concern that on the night that she died, she was actually liberated. But she died not of that, but of malnutrition, because everyone let her eat. So it's a very strange case, but it was allowed so that things could come out. And out of that have come many things, because it was just after the council, and maybe was allowing that so that we could be warned by the demon himself that he was involved with the dismantling of things out there. So some things which are just happening like that, they're not just of human origin. And it's very specific. Some of the things that came out, they're very specific indeed. There was very much behind wrenching out altar rails, getting altars very close. It's stuff which wasn't really thought out deeply. Unfortunately, the oomph, the thrust of renewal in Vatican II was hijacked by strange, sinister forces, because there was a huge potential for genuine renewal, which happened as well, but it was used also for a hidden agenda by some very powerful people, because things which came out as thought to be obligatory after the council weren't even mentioned or even thought about by the council fathers. So it's extremely subtle what actually happened. And this business then of getting down years later, 50 years later now, to a situation which was unthinkable by the council fathers themselves is very, very strange. When there's so little opposition happened to it, one wonders how. And therefore one asks himself, is there some huge intelligence, more intelligent than we, who are actually fighting against the Lord himself through priests and bishops who weren't perhaps in that mode of contemplative awareness that would have been a barrage against it. Which brings me to where I would like just to land for a moment. It's why it happened here in the West and not in the East. There's one big difference between the East and the West. You know what it is? It's the fact that all the bishops in the East practically are from the monastic and therefore contemplative world. It has to be so because of the law of celibacy, and the local parish priest is therefore married but before ordination, and therefore they take from the unmarried and those who are well-educated monks, but they're therefore coming not from what we have in the West, very good administrators, very good pastors, very good men of action, but perhaps not always of that caliber of interiority and intimacy, which is a hidden protection for the handling of the sacred. Because one looks at any celebration in the East, particularly by a bishop, and one sees straight away otherness, time, majesty, dignity, holiness, and honour and praise and glory given to something that they're not bullying about and possessing, but something they're obedient to, because we have become disobedient to the one that we're honouring. And unfortunately, our bishops are taken, of course, from priests who have done very well, who have been very charismatic, who have been very in the limelight, shall we say, but not always, especially in the crucial period when these bishops were applying things massively, and therefore not reacting, because they were the ones to put the block on things. There was more latitude for things to go wrong. Paul VI commented in the early 70s on it, the smoke of Satan has come into the temple of God by some chink. So this was one of them. The fact that the people in key positions at the key time, it's still going on a bit, weren't fully aware on a contemplative level of the responsibility they had to do what no one else could do in their place: protect the sacred, safeguard what was received from the apostles, keep the deposit, said Paul to Timothy. Now, just finish this bit then. What ferocious enemies! And when they approach my victim, I must run away, or sooner or later I must flee. What prayers they do, and always in the name of that their God. And we know from exorcists, by the way, and Ratzinger copped on, because the last liturgical document to be published in the wake of Vatican II was the rite of exorcism, and I remember it coming out initially at the time. It came out in Italian and in Latin for us, but it's the only one that had this proviso on it, and it came, I believe, from Ratzinger himself. The exorcists themselves knew more than those who were handling this, and they knew that what worked was the old. So even though it was published, and it's a good document, especially the preamble, very good, the one who had the last word on it, let it be understood from the beginning, but you can also use the old.
I know.
And you know about it. There we are.
I am an exorcist.
Wow! Experiencia docet, non sapevo. Oh la la! Wow!
I was in Rome in May. I was in Rome in May.
In May?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, there was a big convening of exorcists. That's it. And you would have met Father Benigno and what's the name of that?
Valmonte.
He was there, was he? Yeah, the one who took his place now, what's his name?
Valmonte.
Belmonte. Si, I know him. Yeah. So I didn't know you know all that, but that's it. They were up against it then, this trench warfare. There we are. Now, what prayers and so on, and of that woman, mother of the crucified one, oh, what pain, what torture for me. So, this is the end of the interview. Here it is, my dear Vincent, what the devil said by way of the mouth of the possessed who were exorcised by me, or rather exorcised by me, in the presence of my collaborators, and which I recorded on magnetic tape. Certainly, not all the arguments are covered. I brought out only some of them, the more burning and important ones, which will serve, I hope, to help all those people to reflect who want to live seriously their own baptism, which is a yes to God and a no to the devil. The list is tremendous, and it merits serious reflection and examination of conscience on the part of everyone. But above all, it merits assiduous prayers and penance, the frequent practice of sacramental confession, where the blood of Jesus purifies us and gives us a very strong shield with which to defeat our enemy. So there we are. With that we say, let's obey and we're safe.